Hello, my name's Bev and I'm the author of the book Please Eat, A Mother's Struggle to Free Her Teenage Son from Anorexia, which describes our family's battle with the deadly eating disorder, anorexia nervosa, which my teenage son Ben developed back in 2009 when he was just 15 years old. Once upon a time, parents were blamed for their child's eating disorder. Usually the mother, it was the mother's fault that the young person had developed an eating disorder. Thank goodness this outdated belief has been quashed long ago. And yet still, back when my son Ben developed an eating disorder in 2009, there was still this stigma that somehow the parents were to blame. It was the family's fault. The young person wouldn't have developed an eating disorder if it wasn't for the mother being too clingy or helicopter parenting, whatever. And that is most definitely not the case. Parents are not responsible for their child's eating disorder. And this post from the 19th of September 2011 is called, "Is it something we've done? Is it something I've done?" This is what Ben's dad said over and over again and still does on bad days. It's also what I used to say sometimes. Did I overfeed him as a baby or as a child? Was it my fault he developed an insatiable appetite and got a little bit plump towards the end of his primary school years? The general consensus of expert opinion is that parents do not cause their child's eating disorder. An eating disorder is far too complex to have such a straightforward single cause. These days, experts reiterate over and over again that parents are not to blame for the anorexia, bulimia, or other eating disorder. Instead, an eating disorder is thought to develop as a result of a variety of issues, what I interpret as a toxic mix of genetic makeup and general disposition, exacerbated by a mix of external environmental factors. In our particular case, I believe the toxic mix could comprise a bit of all kinds of things. It could comprise a bit of my dad's tendencies towards OCD and perfectionism and his social anxiety, and my husband's family's predisposition towards addiction and some mental health issues. On top of this is the fact that Ben got quite plump as a child and was bullied at primary school. Mind you, I believe he would have been bullied whatever size he was. As a baby and toddler, Ben was loud and inconsolable most of the time. He found it virtually impossible to play nicely with other babies and toddlers at mother and toddler groups and so on. Instead, he'd either sit there with a face like thunder, which instantly told any intrepid little 2-year-old about to make friends with him to back off or else, or he'd scream blue murder, so much so that we'd have to make a quick exit. I was the mum the other mums looked at in horror, the mum with the uncontrollable child. Yet by primary school, Ben had gone to the other extreme. He was incredibly quiet, shy and serious, the kind of boy who'd make one good friend, a similarly quiet and shy boy, and keep a million miles away from the boisterous boys who play football and generally mess around. Also, for a reason we could never fathom out, Ben's confidence was at an all-time low. All of this made him an obvious target for bullying, and by the final year at primary school, Ben was already seeing a therapist about confidence and his fear of school. We nearly took Ben out of school and had found a place at another school if he wanted it, but it was so close to moving up to high school anyway that Ben insisted he wanted to stay. Thankfully, the bully went to another secondary school, so he left Ben's life for good. Ben had a couple of issues with some unpleasant boys at secondary school, but these were quickly quashed by a zero-tolerance approach to bullying and the support of a school with a tremendous ethic. As I've said before, Ben thrived during those first years at secondary school before the eating disorder hijacked his life. But deep down, Ben was still essentially quiet, shy and serious. He still lacked confidence and had a low opinion of himself, inside and out. And he'd never quite been able to shake off an underlying depressive nature. He always says that, having been overweight as a child, he dreaded becoming the fat boy again, so he did everything in his power to ensure that would never happen. Even though, to people on the outside, Ben was incredibly popular within his peer group, Ben himself wasn't too certain about this. Something inside him began to nag that a surefire way to gain the true popularity he craved, especially with the girls, was to get a six-pack and develop the kind of perfect physique he saw in those men's health magazines. When he looked like this, everything would be perfect. He'd be uber confident and everyone, especially the girls, would love him. And the rest, as they say, is history. The point of this? I believe a number of factors triggered Ben's eating disorder: his genetic makeup, his general disposition, and a mix of environmental factors from childhood puppy fat to bullying. There is nothing that we as parents could have done to avoid the eating disorder developing. I believe it would have happened no matter what, or it would have manifested itself in some other way, like addiction, clinical depression, or OCD. So as I keep having to tell Ben's dad, no, you are not to blame. It isn't anything you or I did or didn't do. It just happened. And that's the end of that post. Thank you for listening. You'll find a link below to my blog, and you'll also find a link to my website where you can download free PDFs of my blog, and also a link to Amazon where you can buy a copy of my book.